Hello, I'm Gina Chanel Wilcox, President and Publisher of Embarcadero Media's East Bay Division, which includes the Pleasanton Weekly, pleasantonweekly.com, danvillesanramon.com, and livermorevine.com. I've assembled a panel tonight of some experts in housing development, state law, the mandates, and the consequences that surround housing mandates. These local experts include representatives from the cities of Pleasanton, Livermore, and San Ramon, and the town of Danville. Dublin wanted to participate, but unfortunately they did not have a staff member available at this time. So a little background on RHHA. It's been around since about 1969. And over the years, it's become more of a regional planning process as opposed to just one municipality at a time. So every 8 years, the state gives our region, which is the San Francisco Bay Area, a number of housing units. This cycle, which is the sixth, covers 2023 to 2031. And our number was 441,000 plus. Sounds like a lot, but so our representative, which is the Association of Bay Area Governments, puts together a methodology and distributes portions of this housing number to municipalities. Now, when the Tri-Valley communities got theirs, they were a little taken aback, not because they didn't know that they were going to be higher than they were in the last cycle, but more because they were really high. So anyway, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Gina. It's good to be here. My name is Ellen Clark. I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of Pleasanton.
David?
My name is David Crompton. I'm the Chief of Planning for the town of Danville.
Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Uranga. I am the Assistant Community Development Director for Livermore.
And Cindy?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Yee. I'm with the City of San Ramon. I work as a senior planner and on the housing element update for the city.
Very valuable. Great, thank you. So the allocations given to the Tri-Valley communities in this cycle were unexpectedly high. Is that fair to say? Yeah, because I know that many, well, all of the municipalities in the Tri-Valley had expected much lower. And as I mentioned earlier, the town and the cities of Pleasanton, Dublin, and San Ramon appealed in the town of Danville, and Livermore did not. So first question, what were the expected numbers, and what was the number that your city or town eventually received in 2021? And then Ellen, Cindy, and David, why did the municipalities you represent choose to appeal, and what reason was given for denial? And then Eric, if you can start us out with the numbers, and why did the city of Livermore choose not to appeal?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Small correction, these numbers are high, no doubt, very high, higher than anybody's comfortable with. But it was totally unexpected by the city of Livermore. We had early messaging from the state and ABAG indicated that we could expect to see our numbers double this round, and so a higher number was not a total surprise. Did we like it? No. Is it a lot? Absolutely. The last cycle, Livermore's allocation was 2,729, and Livermore's allocation for the current cycle is 4,570. We've seen almost doubling, and that, like I said, is very high. Generally, we did not appeal because we had expected this amount and we are prepared for it. We have a sufficient sites that will cover it. And so we were able to meet this number. And so there was no reason for us to appeal.
Okay, great, thank you. And David, since Danville was the first in the Tri-Valley to appeal, could you let us know what the numbers you expected were and what you ended up with, and why did you appeal?
Yeah, I think that everybody expected a higher number. The state, declared a housing shortage crisis. And so in our last 8-year cycle, the 5th cycle, we had a RHHA of about 550 units, which we accommodated. And in this round, we had a RHHA of 2,241. So we quadrupled our RHHA. So we certainly, I think we were probably expecting maybe double, maybe 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 units, but we got we got quadrupled, not just doubled. So it was a bit of surprise. And, we did appeal it, and we monitored the process that ABAG went through with their allocation committee that they had for about a year. And the reasons that we appealed it was that, we looked at jobs and housing and other potential impacts. And number one, we thought that the units should be, kind of clustered around where the jobs are. So if you look at the number of jobs created in the South Bay over the last 10 years, and you look at the amount of housing produced down there, they're way out of whack. So number one, jobs housing balance, which also addresses vehicle miles traveled, because in Danville we don't have mass transit, we don't have even a very active bus line, and so these new units in Danville are going to add to the traffic on the freeways, and then that's also related to greenhouse gases. That we have a state mandate to everybody does, to reduce greenhouse gases going forward, and so this will only exacerbate the greenhouse gases by not putting the homes where the jobs are. So those were the main bases for our appeal. And they were, I think a lot of cities had similar reasons for the appeal, and they were just rejected out of hand. And so we're going forward with our RHHA assignment.
Okay, and Ellen, what about in Pleasanton?
Thank you. So I think, like the others, the signals were all there from other regions of the state, Southern California and Sacramento, who are on a slightly earlier cycle than the Bay Area, that the allocations for the 6th cycle were going to be considerably higher than the prior cycle particularly. And I was, as you were talking, I was desperately trying to look up our last cycle allocation, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was around 2,700 or 2,800 units in Pleasanton. So our allocation of 5,965 units was not unexpected, but difficult to sort of contemplate how we were going to meet that number. For many of the same reasons that others have mentioned, the city of Pleasanton had concerns about the way in which the methodology was developed. It was a lengthy process, it was complicated, and it was being tracked at the same time that the large regional plan for the Bay Area, Plan Bay Area, was being developed, and there's a correlation between those two documents. So because of COVID and other factors, the two things were happening together, which I think complicated matters as well. So we had concerns, as David outlined, about the patterns of housing distribution, that it did not seem to really achieve some of the goals that are part of those regional plans, like putting housing where the largest amount of job production is, which has been over the last 10 years overwhelmingly in the South Bay. And that we felt that the allocations didn't really reflect that planning goal, didn't address the sorts of greenhouse gas emissions targets that the state and the region are looking to accomplish. And that didn't properly take account of some of the constraints that we see in our jurisdictions around things like transit availability. We are facing, as many of you know, a water supply issue here with our PFAS contamination, and that was an emerging issue as well at the time that the allocations were delivered. So those are just a couple of the reasons why we appealed. We weren't successful. I think most of us felt like it was a long shot, but we needed to really put our perspective out there with the region, sort of state our case, let our concerns be known, and do that in a way through the only really mechanism that we have, which is the appeals process. So we, like most other jurisdictions, were not successful, unfortunately.
Actually, I think in the 470 plus jurisdictions, only 2 were granted. And those numbers that they were reduced went to their neighbors. That I'm sure went over well. Cindy, how about in San Ramon?
Sure. So in San Ramon, our last cycle, the city had about 1,400 units allocated in that 5th cycle, which we were able to accommodate in San Ramon. In this new round, our allocation went up over 3.5 times. So San Ramon now has 5,111 units that we have to plan for. We were expecting, just as other cities were, maybe 2 times more, perhaps 3,000 units, a double of what we had previously. But, over 3.5 times higher allocation was something that we had not expected. Our appeal really was based on 2 concepts. One, as David mentioned, the lack of mass transit and major transit stops in San Ramon. And placing more housing in San Ramon would really only increase commute times, get us further away from our greenhouse gas strategies that we've been trying to put the housing closer to the employment bases. And then our second reason that we outlined was we didn't think that ABAG had properly taken into account the amount of commercial space that had been converted in the last 5 years. San Ramon has lost about 1.5 million square feet of office space, and we've replaced that in the last 5 years with over 1,000 units, and have continued to allocate additional units in that office space area. And so we didn't believe that ABAG had adequately accounted for the loss in jobs and the loss in office square footage as part of our appeal. But again, as you've mentioned, we were not able to convince them that was enough reason to take a reduction.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next, how are the sites? I mean, this is a big, time-consuming, costly process every 8 years. How are the sites selected in your communities? How are the residents involved? And were there controversial sites? And if so, how were those situations handled? Lot going on there. Sorry about that. So you know what? Since we just spoke with Cindy, Cindy, can you tell us San Ramon's process?
Sure. So San Ramon started our housing element update process about 1.5 years ago. And over the course of the last 1.5 years, we've conducted over 17 community workshops, study sessions, public hearings with the community. Our process has really been working to engage stakeholders, conducting stakeholder interviews, working with our faith-based organizations, reaching out to local community groups to get input on sites and what their priorities were in terms of housing programs and policies. We've done a large amount of outreach at various community events like the Art and Wind Festival, the Run for Education. So we've really tried to get out there and engage the public through surveys and through a website that we've created dedicated to the general plan update and the housing element update. Housing sites are really looked at as a collective, group to determine where density is going to best be received. because of our high allocation, Saramone, and over 3,000 additional units that we have to plan for in Saramone, our focus was primarily on where is higher density going to best be suitable, and continue to maintain walkable communities, areas where sites can be accessed, people who may eventually move into those sites can access services and the commercial needs that they might have without getting into their cars. And so you'll see a lot of our housing opportunity sites are really concentrated into the core of the city, where most of our services are, to try to reduce some of that reliance on vehicle usage. Our controversial sites in this round happen to be more of our commercial and mixed use sites, where community was concerned about the loss of services within their existing neighborhoods and the replacement of those services with more housing. And so that has been a major concern within the Saramone community. We've been looking at different development standards that could balance the ability to maintain those services and maintain the commercial uses, while still also meeting our housing goals by allowing some additional housing to go on those sites. So it's been quite a bit of a struggle to maintain that balance of the needs of the existing residents and the needs of future residents. But I think at this point, we have adequate sites that we've identified, and so we have the ability to accommodate that additional growth that we were expecting.
And just to mix it up a little bit here, David, can you talk about how your sites are selected?
Sure. Yeah, we have been working on the housing element here for a couple of years as well. And so we've done a lot of community engagement. I think we've had over 50 webinars, study sessions with our commissions and council, gone out and met directly and presented information directly to groups, like the Chamber of Commerce and faith-based groups, the local realtors associations, veterans, seniors, you name it, anybody that would talk to us. We had booths out on the sidewalks. We sent townwide mailers. We had pages in our quarterly newsletters that goes to every resident. We did a townwide survey. We have a website where we invited people to come and drop pins. It's a site selection map to help us tell us where they think the community thinks that the appropriate sites would be. And then once the sites were identified, another tool where residents went in and added density to the different sites to show, kind of toggle back and forth and get to how we can get to our arena number. So, and that's in addition to the town staff work to go out and look parcel by parcel in town to see what our existing inventory is of undeveloped residential land. And then to identify sites that we believe would pass the state's review. The sites that we rezone or general plan change have to have some reasonable expectation of redeveloping in the next 8 years. So you can't just go and drop a general plan multifamily on a brand new commercial center. That's not going to redevelop. So we scoured the town, mostly concentrating on older underused sites, older office parks, older commercial strip commercial, and that type of thing. So it was a combination of the community engagement, the communities pointing us towards sites that they thought might be the most appropriate, and then town staff's evaluation of the sites. Well, the only controversy we had was some of the sites that were identified were open space areas in town. And we got a lot of pushback from that. And I don't think we ever would have intended to redesignate open space for residential use, but there were a few that were identified, and we dropped all of those off of our, kind of our short list. We had a long list of sites, and we had a short list that we ended up taking to the public hearings.
And Ellen.
So in terms of outreach, as everybody has said, outreach was really core to our housing element process. And I think we've had over 40, so we call them touch points with the community, public hearings, meetings, getting out in the community at events and so on. We also did a community survey early on in the process to really solicit, as much broadly, as much input as we could. It got, I think, over 600 responses to that. So all of those things helped us to understand where community priorities might be. And I think we heard putting the housing near to transit in places where it wouldn't affect existing lower density single family residential neighborhoods were all the sorts of things that the community identified, as well as being proximate to shopping and services. So with that input, and as others have said, with our sort of a screening process to kind of really find what we felt were viable, realistic development opportunities throughout the town, we focused a lot, or have a number of sites which are existing office, park, parcel, shopping centers that have sort of, been around for a while, and they're starting to fade a little bit and have maybe some vacancy. We also have a key opportunity here in Pleasanton at Stonebridge Mall, which is our regional shopping center, has obviously a very, the typical pattern of a lot of surface parking, has seen some retail vacancy over recent years. And so in working with the mall owners, found an interest in diversifying their land use and planning for some housing there as well. So, we went through actually a very deliberate process of really trying to be thoughtful about what makes good sites and what makes sites sort of work from a housing perspective, and to apply that sort of as screening criteria to allow for going from quite a long list at the start of the process, maybe over 30 individual sites, and narrowing that down to what we expect is going to be a list of more like 15 or 16 sites at the end of the day. There's been a lot of discussion. I think the sites that have been controversial are, as others have said, the sites that do, especially where people have, a favorite restaurant or a business that they think is really valuable to the community. We also heard concern about service commercial uses, so your auto repair and your tire shops. I know they're not the most glamorous, and beautiful uses maybe in your city. They're nonetheless the things that people really make up part of the fabric of the community and provide those essential services. So we did get some feedback that we wanted to make sure we weren't eliminating too many of those kinds of locations as well. And then I think the second sort of category of controversial sites were sites that really had those, I'll say, just single family residential proximities and adjacencies where people were concerned about adding particularly high density housing sort of in their right next door or close by. But we've tried to really articulate the challenge that we have, and although we understand that individually within neighborhoods there's going to be concern, is that the city has to make difficult choices across the board in all of these sites. So we're doing our best to find the best, most sustainable, most appropriate locations. But inevitably they have to be in somebody's neighborhood or near somebody's home. And so balancing those things with the mandate that exists under state housing law is really that's the challenge of this cycle, is that there's a lot of hard choices to be made. But I think we have successfully done that in finding an inventory with valid sites, interested property owners, locations that make sense, transit focus where we can, and distribute it as well in our community. I think that was another sort of theme, was don't put it all in one place. Try and sort of make sure that the housing is distributed around the city, so we're not sort of loading up all the impact of that new growth into one particular area as well. So we've attempted to maintain that geographic balance sort of as a principle, I would say, in our site selection.
Right. Sort of the difference between San Ramon's process and Pleasanton's, because San Ramon's focusing on the poor. And Eric, what's up in Livermore?
Yeah, well, typically when staff begins to look at it, we start off with identifying sites that already currently are available, by looking at our general plan and our specific plans and, and previous housing elements, what helped us in the process is what's helping us or assisting us in this process is we're currently updating our general plan too. And that also, visits on a citywide basis, looks at different sites in different areas, both commercial and residential, and determining proper mixes throughout the city. The general plan is, housing elements is one part of that. And as part of that, we had a general plan advisory committee, and they had dozens of meetings and different kinds of community outreach at all the different levels, all the different groups, different members of the public. Our advisory committee is made up of members of our citizens, and going through that as part of the process. And one of the things that also has aided us is the Isabel neighborhood specific plan. It's up towards by the Costco area. I guess there would be for people who are familiar with that general location. The neighbor that plan itself will accommodate over half our needed units, and that was done over the last 2 years. And it's going to create a mix of uses, walkable, bikeable, served by transit, and Valley Link will be part of that eventually. And it was, like I said, key to meeting about 50% of our arena numbers. The plan was a comprehensive outreach and engagement process during throughout its development, and included sites that both the community, the property owners, and developers all understand will be developed into housing. So that's what was a key to our reaching our numbers. Yeah.
Okay, great. And well, the big question here is, what happens if you just say no? I mean, it doesn't fit. What happens if a community says that all of these units just doesn't fit into their vision for their community and just says, we can't do this? What happens? Ellen?
Maybe I'll answer that one, because we in Pleasanton have direct experience of that, that conversation. And so back in 2012, it was just a very contentious, as it is this cycle, the amount of housing, drought, water supply issues, all sorts of concern about those things. And the city delayed submittal of its housing element to the point where we were out of compliance. We hadn't submitted a compliant housing element to the state, and ultimately the city was subject to a lawsuit that was ultimately settled. The Attorney General intervened in that lawsuit and essentially said to Pleasanton, you need to get in line with these housing laws. During the course of the settlement agreement, the state actually withdrew our ability to issue land use permits, and there, that was a serious repercussion that needed to be corrected by ultimately working with HCD, with the state, to come up with, through a settlement agreement, a compliant housing element. And that was the city of Pleasanton's experience. And, I think as difficult as it is, I think we as communities kind of understand that the consequence of not being in compliance is significant, and the enforcement actions available to the state are more consequential now than they were even in 2012. And so we are doing our best as a community to come up with a plan that really balances the community's expectations, needs, and concerns as best we can, but also delivers what the state is asking for in terms of planning for housing, especially for affordable housing.
Oh, David, were you going to say something?
I was just gonna, I guess if it's, I'll just jump in. No is just not an option. because of the teeth that the state has passed, the laws of enforcement. So, they range from, penalties or fines of up to $600,000 a month. They can build up to. They can close down your building department. So if you don't have a compliant housing element, you can't issue building permits for, anything, home additions or remodels, and the things that the normal citizens are wanting to do every day. And then, maybe worst of all, if you don't do it, then the state will step in and they'll take away your planning function, and instead of us trying to find a way to fit the housing into our community the best that we can, because we know our communities, the state can come in and tell you where to put the housing and what the density should be. So in the end, you're going to end up with the housing. And so the best we can do is try to do it our way, and try to make, design the development, put it in locations that best is in character with our community.
Cindy, do you have anything to weigh in? So we've heard that there can be legal challenges, financial.
Yeah, I think just as David said, a number of the grants that the cities rely on for funding for things like transportation, road repairs, a lot of that is dependent on having an adopted and certified housing element. And so some of the funding that we get from the state is contingent on having that document certified. And so you run the risk of potentially not being able to provide those transit needs in your community, or get some of the funding dollars to be able to build the affordable housing that's tied to a certified housing element.
Eric, do you have anything to add?
No, it is pretty well covered for the first three folks. Loss of grants, strong reaction by HCD. What we find, you just can't just unilaterally say no. And we got to remember that you're not required to build these units. You just have to show how that number of units can be accommodated. And there's a big difference there. I think the public needs to understand that approving 5,000 units in your community doesn't mean over the next year you're gonna get 5,000 units in your backyard, or even the city. I think that's an important thing to consider. It's still very difficult, and and the state's mandates to do this are no one likes, and no one, and I think the best way to accommodate the numbers is by ensuring that you have the highest quality design review and standards, and meets the local needs as much as possible in the areas it's going to be, where the services are the best for it, and and you kind of go from there.
Yeah, and that loss of local control.
That's the worst thing of all. Yeah.
I agree. So, like I said in my intro, people say there's not enough water. There's crisis there. Some schools are overcrowded. There's traffic. There's a lot of traffic. So what how are the cities and the town accommodating so more houses can be built during a drought? And how are you mitigating the traffic and things like that?
Well, I can pick this off, I guess. So we are planning on adopting all of the general plan changes and rezonings and text amendments that we need to do to implement our housing element, to create the sites at the same time that we're approving our housing element. And so we did an EIR to study the potential impacts of adding 2,000 new units in different sub areas around town. And it found that there was 3 areas that found that the impacts would be significant and unmitigatable. And those were in the in the areas of water service. Number 1, we're in East Bay Mud's water district, and East Bay Mud has they're currently going on their 2020 water management plan. And if you look at their projected water service availability over the next 8 years and look at the number of units, they don't have enough water to serve. And so, but because we cannot not approve a housing element, we had to adopt a statement of overriding considerations regarding the water, saying, okay, we acknowledge that impact, but we have to approve this anyways. Same thing in traffic impacts. The CEQA standard is VMT, vehicle miles traveled. And the only mitigation there was that if we clustered all of the 2,000 units in smaller area of the downtown area near the freeway, that would mitigate it. But that would also result in densities and heights and stories that would be out of character with Danville. And so we adopted a statement of overriding considerations there as well. And then on the greenhouse gases, both the vehicle miles traveled as well as the energy consumption by the homes results in a significant greenhouse gas impact that can't be mitigated. It can be partially mitigated by, there's a mitigation measure that's being proposed that all the new units be served by electric power only, no natural gas. But that wouldn't reduce it to a less than significant threshold. So, schools are a little bit different story. They, under state law, if a developer pays school impact fees, then that's considered to be adequate mitigation. But there's at least 3 significant impacts that we identified that we can't mitigate and that we're going to acknowledge and go forward because, again, the penalties for not having a housing element adopted are just too great.
Anybody else want to speak up on that?
That was very thorough. I would think I would add, in terms of accommodating for the drought, the city has implemented a number of strategies to do that. Because again, you can't say no. So how do you lessen the impact? So we're, across the board, the city has worked to reduce its water usage, and I think we've reduced it by over 15% already. I think overall we've saved over the last number of years, we've saved dropped it by 13%, which amounts to 551 million gallons. So since September 21, so I think that lessens the impact. Again, that doesn't remove it. Cal Water, our water company, we also work with them to offer rebates and different programs to save the water and limit water usage. And those are kind of the things that we're trying to do, just to lessen the impact.
Yeah, maybe if I could also add, so similar to Danville, our environmental impact report for the housing element found significant and unavoidable impacts around water supply, principally about the supply that's been taken offline recently due to PFAS contamination in our local groundwater wells. And so the city is working very aggressively to find solutions to that shortfall, whether it's additional supply from Zone 7, whether it's providing local water treatment, whether it's, as Eric mentioned, a more aggressive conservation over time. And we think we will have solutions there. I mean, it's in this, we have to do it with or without the housing element. So we're going to aggressively address that challenge. But at the time of writing our EIR, we didn't have an answer and we didn't know exactly how it's going to be done. So had to make that finding. And then with respect to VMT, for our environmental analysis, that's really a factor of our suburban location, is that we have, just our historic patterns of development make places like Pleasanton, the Tri-Valley, more auto dependent than inner Bay Area suburbs and cities. And so when you look at our vehicle miles traveled in Pleasanton versus a countywide average, which is our comparative metric, they're high almost no matter what you do. And so we can mitigate, and we will be mitigating by requiring things like more aggressive called transportation demand measure, TDM measures, to encourage people to take transit, to bike, to do all of the things that help to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles and doing other things, but those can only go so far. And so as others have said, we have no choice but to adopt a housing element. We will be having to make those findings of significant unavoidable impact. And the overriding considerations, which is the need to have a housing element in compliance with state law. So we're simultaneously acknowledging and addressing the challenges, although the solutions are complicated and will take a lot of work to accomplish.
Cindy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one more point to add in that, oftentimes I think residents may be confused about what authority a city has in terms of making determinations about water service or school capacity. In Saramone, we rely on special districts such as East Bay Mud and DSRSD to provide water service to these project areas. As part of every project that we evaluate, we do request comments from the service providers as part of the development review process. And so we are engaging them as part of this process. State law recently changed in where it does require these water service providers to prioritize water service for affordable housing projects. And so if there were projects to say no to, the affordable housing projects would still have the priority in getting approved. And so that is just something else to consider, is that the approach to the drought is coming from a multitude of angles in which we're trying to solve this problem, and trying to prioritize affordable housing is just another measure that the state's using to be able to resolve some of these drought concerns.
Right, thank you.
But if I could just add onto that, because Cindy brought up a good point, and that even though we are changing the general plan and zoning to allow for multifamily housing as part of the housing element, each individual property will still need to go through a development review if they actually want to come in and build. And so at that point, we will be consulting with the water providers. And if we were told that they're not going to serve the project, obviously it wouldn't be approved and it wouldn't be built. So that's something that we'll deal with down the road.
And maybe just on the school's impact, because that has been a concern locally, and so the school district, Pleasanton Unified School District, is that's the agency that provides school facilities in Pleasanton. It isn't the city, and so our job really then is to coordinate, provide information, and help PUSD do its planning appropriately, whether it's district boundary adjustments like in the process that's underway at the moment. Planning and assisting with planning for new schools facilities if those turn out to be needed. I think that coordination piece and working with our service providers, as others have mentioned, is really important to planning for that need, because not all of this housing is going to appear tomorrow. We're planning for providing the capacity, but as we all know, things take time, and so. Again, all these units are not going to appear overnight. It's going to be a progression of projects and entitlements that happen over the next 8 years and beyond. And so sort of trying to align facilities planning with our housing planning is there's still an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. So we are coming to the end of our time here, and I wanted to see if panelists, if you have anything to add, and what do you want the audience to take away from this?
I think if I had a few things like the Livermore residents to know is that your city wants you to outreach to us, go to the meetings, attend that, give your input, tell us what you think, and learn to understand this complicated question and what we can and cannot do. And together it's kind of develop the best plan for us under the circumstances. I think there's a lot more, there's been a lot of public meetings. There'll be a lot more in the future. I think at least a number in the future attend the planning commission meetings and the council meetings, and become part of the process, because that way we make sure your voices are heard and we get the best plan possible.
Okay. Anybody?
Yeah, I would add to that, and just perhaps for Saramone residents, consider that even though we are mandated to adopt a housing element, consider this as a opportunity to provide input and to really guide the development and the growth in the city in the way that the community would like to see it, and the direction that it'd like to see it go. The housing element, in addition to planning for these units, really gives us more choices for housing options. It also will help in terms of creating more affordable housing and to kind of reduce some of the pressures of the high costs of housing in our community. And it really gives us an opportunity to be involved in the process. And so even though it's mandated for cities to adopt a housing element, really look at this as a positive opportunity to get involved and to shape the community in the way that you'd like to see it.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Eric and Cindy both said. It's, we're being mandated to do this, and the number is really high and it's really hard to accommodate. But, Danville is a very expensive place to live. And we do get a lot of feedback from people that, either they want to retire and move down, or, kids that grew up in Danville want to be able to come back. And so, the housing and affordable housing is certainly not a bad thing. So just want to, again, echo that there's a lot of review to go forward. Once this is approved, each individual project is going to come through a design process, and there'll be a lot of notifications. So, and everybody, hopefully anybody that's concerned will get involved and help shape what these actually look like when we do receive actual applications.
So yeah, for Pleasanton residents, again, I think, as others have said, we have the opportunity to shape the plan, to make decisions, and we do appreciate all of the work and the input that we've heard today from our Pleasanton residents. And a theme, I will say, in addition to the concerns, is exactly as others have said, that what, my adult kids can't afford to move here, or my mom wants to downsize and can't find a smaller, more affordable unit to live in. And so it does affect our community. Housing, affordable housing, is part of the fabric of our community. It's a need, and I think our job as planning staff, as the city, and our decision makers is to really make sure we shape that plan in the best way that we can. We're also doing what we can to make sure that development fits with our community. So in Pleasanton, we are working on adopting design standards that we really hope will make sure that these projects are beautiful and are livable and have great amenities, so that we're really getting the kind of quality development that our Tri-Valley cities and our city needs and wants and expects and ought to achieve. And so the local control aspect is concerning. We do have tools available through planning, through developing appropriate standards to shape that into something that fits with who we are and what we want to see. And so those, at least hopefully are some bright spots in what I think has been a challenging process for everybody in this room and across the Bay Area.
There is a question from an audience member. Can we take another 2 or 3 minutes?
Sure.
What is each jurisdiction's funding requirement? How much do they have available, and what is the funding gap? Where is the funding coming from? First of all, what is
Affordable housing?
Oh, okay, there we go. That's easy. So are there subsidies required for that, and where do they come from?
Well, that's the big problem. I mean, a lot of communities, especially Danville, that we have experience with building a project at 40 units an acre, but they're anything but affordable, even at that density. And so unless you have some nonprofit or you have some funding to buy down the cost of land and construction, they're not going to be affordable. So there's funding, there's nonprofit builders out there. There are, grants and, state and federal levels that can be available. But, in general, developers build for profit. And so, we didn't talk on the requirement for the no net loss laws, where we have to have a buffer over and beyond our RHHA for that case, where you build a project that you expected to be affordable, but when it's in the ground and sold or rented, it's not affordable. So you can point to other areas where you still have enough capacity. But yeah, that's a problem. We have these mandates, but there's not really any or enough funding to actually make these affordable.
And I can add to that too. I'd be glad to. You're right. The number required for, especially in the very low income categories, is huge. And there are no jurisdictions anywhere that have enough local funds to meet the entire amount. Livermore takes the issue of affordable housing very seriously. And we've had for quite a few years an inclusionary housing requirement. So every time a developer builds in our community, anywhere from 15 to 20% are Isabel neighborhood specific plan. 20% of those units will be made affordable to very low to moderate income households. So we hope to, that will accommodate, a few hundred affordable housing units. In addition, we have like 300 or 400 more in the pipeline, a couple hundred more under development, ranging, so our seniors who want to move down will have, we have 3 senior projects. One recently completed, 2 underway. We have a number of family projects. It's just, we raise our local funds through developer fees, and through other sources, CDBG, home, state, and federal grants. We do quite a bit. We have a record we're proud of. Does it meet all the need? No. Does it meet a lot? And do we have some really great projects for folks in our community who have disabilities or who are senior or just lower income or even moderate income? You can make $100,000 a year here and have a very difficult time. But then we hope to have places coming online for folks like that. So it's cities can be very proactive in that. They'll never meet the whole need, but they can address some.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that adequately answered that audience member's question. I want to thank our panelists, David from the town of Danville, Eric from City of Livermore, Ellen from City of Pleasanton, and Cindy from the City of San Ramon. As I mentioned, Dublin did want to participate, but did not have a staff member available. But I thank you, and this is recorded, and I will get this live as soon as possible. We have a reporter who is going to cover this, and the links to the different sites, the different YouTube sites will be in those stories. So on that, I thank you again, and I thank the audience members, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.